My name is Rosa Delgado. I am 63 years old, and I used to believe that a mother's love was the one currency that never lost its value. I was wrong. I learned that the hard way on a Tuesday evening in November, sitting at a dining room table I had helped pay for, in a house I had helped furnish, eating food I had cooked from scratch because my daughter-in-law had a headache, and my son had walked in from the airport 40 minutes earlier and announced he was starving. I had driven 20 minutes to their house that afternoon, let myself in with the spare key Mateo had given me 2 years ago, and started cooking before either of them came downstairs. Arroz con pollo. His favorite since he was 9 years old. I had a folded envelope in my handbag that I had been carrying for 3 weeks. I did not know yet that tonight was the night I would use it. That was the night everything changed. But to understand what happened at that table, you have to understand what the 31 years before it looked like. I raised Mateo alone. His father, Gerardo, left when Mateo was 2 and his sister Pilar was 4. He did not leave dramatically. He did not fight or slam doors. He simply stopped coming home one Friday evening, and by the following Monday I understood that he was not planning to. I was 32 years old, working as an office manager for a mid-sized civil engineering firm in Phoenix, Arizona, earning $38,000 a year, and suddenly entirely responsible for 2 children under the age of 5. I did not fall apart. I want to say that plainly because what comes later in this story might make it sound like I was a woman who did not know her own strength until someone forced her to find it. That is not accurate. I always knew it. I just never thought I would have to use it in the direction I ended up using it. I want you to stop for a moment, if you're watching this, and think about whether you've ever seen this woman in your own life, the one holding everything together so quietly that nobody thinks to ask how she's doing it. I picked up a second job on weekends, bookkeeping for a small dental practice 3 miles from our apartment. I enrolled Pilar in the public school 2 blocks away and Mateo in a church-subsidized daycare that cost me $190 a month, which was $190 I did not comfortably have but found anyway. I made a budget on a yellow legal pad, not a spreadsheet, those weren't something I used at home yet, and I stuck to it the way some people stick to religion. Every line item had a purpose. Nothing was wasted. I cooked Sunday meals large enough to carry us through Wednesday. I bought winter coats in March when they were marked down 60%. I kept a savings account that I treated as untouchable, and I put $50 into it every single month no matter what else was happening, because I had decided early that my children would not grow up watching their mother have nothing to fall back on. By the time Mateo was 12, I had been promoted twice at the engineering firm and was managing a staff of 7. By the time he was 16, I had saved enough to put a down payment on a small house in a decent school district, a 3-bedroom on a corner lot with a lemon tree in the backyard that Mateo used to climb until he was too tall for it to hold him. I was proud of that house. I am still proud of it. I bought it myself in my own name, and I have never been late on a mortgage payment in 19 years. Mateo was a good boy for a long time. I need to say that too because I am not here to pretend he was always the person he became. He was funny and stubborn and generous with his time when it suited him. He coached youth soccer for 2 seasons when he was in college. He called me every Sunday morning until he was 26 and met Fernanda, and then the calls became every other Sunday, and then monthly, and then whenever he needed something. I noticed. I did not say anything. I told myself it was a natural transition, that he was building his own life, that this was what I had raised him to do. I was 60 years old when Mateo and Fernanda had their first child, a boy they named Sebastian. Their second, a girl named Camille, arrived 18 months later. And sometime between Sebastian's birth and Camille's first birthday, without any formal conversation I can point to, I became the childcare arrangement. It did not happen all at once. That is the thing about this particular kind of cruelty, it rarely does. It arrives in increments small enough that you spend a long time wondering if you're being unreasonable. The first time I felt it clearly, Sebastian was 8 months old. Mateo had a work trip to Dallas, he was in logistics consulting, traveled frequently, always had, and Fernanda had a conference of her own in San Diego that overlapped by 3 days. They called me on a Wednesday evening, together, on speakerphone, with the specific tone people use when they have already decided the answer and are only calling to inform you of it. "Mom, we need you to stay with Sebastian Thursday through Sunday," Mateo said. "Fernanda's mom can't do it, she has her sister visiting." "Of course," I said, because Sebastian was 8 months old and I loved him and that was true. What I did not say was that I had plans for that Saturday. Not large plans, a day trip with my friend Consuelo to Sedona, something we had been trying to schedule for 2 months. I cancelled it without mentioning it to Mateo. I told Consuelo I was sorry, that we'd find another weekend. We did eventually 3 months later. That was the template. That was what I did not recognize as a template until much later. Over the following year I stayed with Sebastian 9 separate times for trips I can name by destination. Dallas twice, Chicago, Seattle, one that I was told was Phoenix but which Fernanda later mentioned was actually Scottsdale for a long weekend. Each time I arranged my own schedule around theirs. Each time I drove 20 minutes to their house, let myself in, and was on duty from the moment I arrived until the moment they returned. I did not complain. I did not keep a formal count. I simply showed up. The first time Mateo said something that landed with a weight I could not immediately explain. Camille was 4 months old and Sebastian had just turned 2. I had been at their house for 4 days covering a trip to Seattle. On the morning they were due back, I gave both children breakfast, cleaned the kitchen, started a load of laundry, and was folding onesies on the living room couch when Mateo came through the front door at 11:30. He set his bag down in the entryway. He glanced at the laundry. He looked at the kitchen. "You didn't have to do all that," he said. "I know," I said. "Fernanda's going to want to reorganize the kitchen anyway. She has a system." I set the onesie I was folding down on the stack. I said nothing for a moment. "I'll leave it as it is then," I said. "I just mean she has a way she likes things." He was already looking at his phone. "Did Sebastian eat this morning?" "He did. Eggs and toast. He ate well." "Good." He scrolled for another few seconds. "Hey, we're going to need you again in 3 weeks. Miami. Both of us this time." I did not ask how long. I said, "Let me know the dates." What I felt in that moment I will not name directly because naming it would have meant acknowledging it, and I was not ready to do that yet. I will say that something in my chest tightened in a way I recognized from a much earlier period of my life, from the months after Gerardo left, when I was teaching myself not to need things I was not going to get. Fernanda was not unkind exactly. That is the difficult part to explain. She was not warm toward me either. She received my presence the way one receives a service, with mild satisfaction when it functioned correctly and visible irritation when it created any friction at all. She had a precise sense of how her household should run and a low tolerance for anything that deviated from it, and because I was frequently in her household and not always certain of the current version of her system, I created friction sometimes. A towel folded the wrong direction. A sippy cup returned to the wrong shelf. Small things. The evening that stays with me most from this period, Camille was about 6 months old, so this was perhaps 18 months after the first Dallas trip. Fernanda came home from a girls' dinner at 9 o'clock to find me still awake in their living room, Camille finally asleep after a difficult evening, Sebastian down since 7:30. I had dealt with a low-grade fever in Camille that had spiked briefly to 101.2 at around 6, brought it down with infant Tylenol, monitored her for 2 hours, and had her settled and comfortable by 8:15. Fernanda looked at me on the couch and said, "You could have texted me." "I didn't want to worry you," I said. "She's fine. Fever broke at 8. "I would have come home early," Fernanda said. She was never in danger. "I've handled fevers before." Fernanda picked up Camille's monitor from the side table, checked it, set it back down. "I prefer to know these things as they happen," she said. "Not after." "I understand," I said. "I'll do that next time." She went upstairs without saying thank you for the 4 hours I had spent managing a sick infant alone on a Friday night while she was at dinner. I smoothed the edge of the throw pillow on the couch and said nothing. I drove home at 9:30 in the dark. If I had written down every hour I gave to Mateo and Fernanda's household across the 4 years between Sebastian's birth and the November dinner, the number would embarrass them. I know this because I eventually did write it down, not in the moment, not as an act of resentment, but much later for a different purpose. At the time I kept no record. I simply kept showing up. I drove to their house and kept both children calm and fed while Mateo spent 10 days in Chicago negotiating a contract that earned his firm $2.3 million in new business. I was not present for the negotiation. I was present for the ear infection Sebastian developed on day 3, the pediatrician visit on day 4, the $47 copay I paid out of my own pocket because their insurance card was in Fernanda's wallet in Chicago and I did not want to bother her. Mateo reimbursed the copay when he returned. He did not mention the ear infection. I drove to their house the February Fernanda's mother was visiting from Guadalajara, because Fernanda had decided the visit was not the right time for the children to be underfoot and had asked me to take both of them to my house for the week. I kept Sebastian, who was then 2.5, and Camille, who was 11 months and not yet walking, in my 3-bedroom house on the corner lot for 7 days. I baby-proofed 2 rooms on short notice. I rearranged my own schedule. I was still working part-time as a bookkeeping consultant at that point, for clients 15 to 20 hours a week, to accommodate 2 small children full-time. I did not bill anyone for the lost hours. I absorbed them. I was the one who took Sebastian to his first day of preschool because Mateo had a flight at 7 a.m. and Fernanda said she couldn't handle the drop-off emotionally. I held Sebastian's hand at the classroom door, crouched down to his eye level, told him his teacher's name was Miss Lorena and that he was going to love the paint corner. He cried for 4 minutes and then spotted a bin of toy trucks and stopped. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes afterward because my own throat had tightened in a way I hadn't expected, and I wanted to be steady before I drove. I was the one who stayed overnight 3 consecutive Fridays in the spring when Fernanda was traveling for a work project and Mateo had client dinners that ran late. 3 Fridays in a row I packed an overnight bag, drove to their house, put both children to bed, slept in the guest room, made breakfast in the morning and drove home after Mateo returned. He returned at 9:30 the first Friday, 10:15 the second, and 11:40 the third. I did not comment on the times. I covered Christmas week that same year. Mateo and Fernanda went to Cabo San Lucas for 5 nights, a trip they had been planning for 6 months, a trip I knew about because Fernanda mentioned it at Thanksgiving in a way that made clear she was not asking, only informing. I kept both children at my house for 5 nights over Christmas. I bought and wrapped 6 presents for Sebastian and 4 for Camille, presents I paid for myself because Mateo had said he'd send money, and then the money had not arrived before Christmas morning, and I had not wanted the children to have a smaller pile than I'd planned. He sent $200 in January with a text that said sorry, holidays got away from me. I kept $200. The presents had cost me $340. I had been retired from the engineering firm for 2 years by this point, living on my pension and a modest investment account my financial advisor had helped me build over 20 years of careful, patient saving. I was not wealthy. I was comfortable, which is a different and more fragile thing, and I was spending portions of that comfort on a household that did not acknowledge the expenditure. There was also the matter of my own house. In the year and a half after Camille was born, I made 17 repairs to my property that I deferred or handled myself rather than hiring contractors, because the months I was most needed at Mateo's house were the months I had the least bandwidth for my own life. The lemon tree needed trimming. The guest bathroom faucet dripped from March to September because I kept intending to call a plumber and kept not having the time. The fence on the north side of the yard needed 3 boards replaced. I bought the boards, stacked them in the garage, and they sat there for 11 months before I finally replaced them myself one Saturday morning when I was too frustrated to wait anymore. I want to be precise about what I was and was not during those years. I was not a martyr. I did not perform my sacrifice or wear it visibly. I showed up, I did the work, I drove home. I made dinner in their kitchen and cleaned it after and left. I loved my grandchildren. That part was simple and real and cost me nothing emotionally. Sebastian's laugh, the particular way Camille reached for me when I came through the door, those things were not transactions. Those things were mine. But there is a difference between love and labor, and the labor I was providing had a dollar value that nobody in that house was accounting for. Full-time childcare in Phoenix runs between $1,800 and $2,400 a month for an infant and a toddler. I was providing the equivalent of that, plus transportation, plus periodic out-of-pocket expenses, plus the deferred cost to my own property and schedule, across a period of nearly 4 years. I did not walk around calculating this. I only calculated it later when I had reason to. What I felt building slowly across those 4 years was not anger exactly. It was something quieter and more corrosive. It was the particular exhaustion of being necessary without being valued, of occupying a role that mattered enormously in practice and was almost entirely invisible in the way people spoke about it. Mateo did not thank me the way you thank someone who is doing you a significant favor. He thanked me the way you thank a taxi driver, briefly in passing on his way to the next thing. Fernanda did not thank me at all mostly. She had arrived at an understanding of my role that I had never agreed to but had been too quiet to contest. I was a resource the household had access to. Resources do not require gratitude. They require maintenance. I told Consuelo some of this over coffee at my house on a Saturday morning in October, about 2 months before the dinner. Consuelo had known me since our children were in elementary school together. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I value most about her. "Rosa," she said when I finished. "What are you waiting for?" I didn't answer her right away. I picked up my coffee cup and held it with both hands and looked out the kitchen window at the lemon tree. "I don't know," I said. "I keep thinking it'll even out." Consuelo looked at me for a long moment. "Has it?" I set my cup down. I said nothing. The dinner was Mateo's idea. He called me on a Thursday morning the first week of November and said he wanted to have a family meal that weekend. "Just us," he said, "close family, nothing formal." He used the phrase check-in twice in the same sentence, which should have told me something. I asked if I should bring anything. "Just yourself," he said. "Fernanda's going to handle the food." Fernanda did not handle the food. When I arrived at 5:30 on Saturday, the kitchen showed no signs of recent use and Fernanda was upstairs with a headache. Mateo was in the living room with his phone. Sebastian came running to the door in his socks and nearly knocked me over, and Camille toddled behind him with a board book under her arm, and I set my bag down and went to the kitchen and started cooking. By 6:15 the arroz con pollo was on the stove. Sebastian had helped me tear lettuce for the salad and gotten bored and wandered back to his toys, and Fernanda had come downstairs in a cardigan and poured herself a glass of water without acknowledging that I was cooking dinner in her kitchen. She sat at the island and scrolled her phone. I set the table around her. Mateo's brother Diego arrived at 6:30 with his wife Paulina. I had not known they were coming. Mateo had not mentioned it on the phone. Diego was 4 years younger than Mateo and had spent most of his adult life finding reasons to need things from other people. He kissed my cheek at the door and said, "Smells incredible, Rosa," which was the most he would contribute to the evening. We sat down at 7. The food was good, it always was. For the first 20 minutes the conversation was easy, surface level, the kind of talk that happens around good food when people haven't decided yet to say the things they actually came to say. Mateo asked Diego about a renovation. Diego asked Mateo about a trip. Fernanda refilled her wine glass twice. Then Sebastian knocked over his milk and Mateo cleaned it up, and something shifted in the room. Mateo sat back down. He looked at me the way he used to look at a problem he was about to solve out loud, which I had recognized as a look since he was a teenager. "Mom," he said, "Fernanda and I have been talking." I placed my fork on the edge of my plate. I waited. "We've got a big year coming up," he said. "A lot of travel. There's the Singapore expansion. I'll be overseas for at least 3 stretches, probably 30 to 40 days total across the year. Fernanda has her own schedule picking up. The kids are getting older, they need consistency." "I understand," I said. "We want you to move in," he said. "Here. Into the guest room. Permanent arrangement." I looked at him. Fernanda was watching the table. "Permanent," I said. "It makes sense," Mateo said. "You're here most of the time anyway. Your house is a lot to maintain on your own. The kids would have stability. You'd have company." I adjusted the edge of my napkin against the table and said nothing. "I'd have company," I repeated. "Mom, it's a good deal for everyone." His tone had shifted slightly, still smooth, but with the particular patience people use when they think they are explaining something to someone slower than themselves. "You wouldn't have to worry about the house, the maintenance, any of that. You'd just be here. Helping." "I have a house," I said. "Which is a lot to manage alone at your age." Diego said nothing. Paulina examined her fork. "Mateo," I said carefully, "are you asking me to give up my home to become a live-in babysitter?" He did not flinch. That was what I remember most. He did not flinch at all. He set his fork down with the measured ease of someone who believed the conversation was already settled. "I'm asking you to be part of this family," he said. "Your role is to help with the kids while Fernanda and I build our careers and travel. That's it. That's what families do." He paused. He glanced at Diego and then back at me, and something in his expression hardened in a way I had not seen before. "If you have a problem with that, Mom, the door is right there. Your choice." The table went very quiet. Camille, who was not old enough to understand anything that had just been said, dropped her spoon on the floor and looked up at me with wide brown eyes. My son had just told me, in front of his brother, his sister-in-law, and his 2 children, that my value to his household was functional. That I existed in the architecture of his life as a resource to be allocated. That if I objected to that, I was welcome to leave the table. I looked at him for a long moment. The kitchen smelled like the arroz con pollo I had cooked. Through the window over the sink I could see the dark and the neighbor's porch light and nothing else. I picked up my wine glass. I took a small sip. I set it back down precisely where it had been. Perfect, I said quietly. Then I'll leave. Nobody moved for a moment. Then Mateo laughed, a short, flat sound that had no warmth in it. Mom. Come on. I'm not joking, I said. You're not going to leave. He picked up his fork again. You have nowhere to go. I looked at him. I have my house, Mateo. Which we've been talking about listing, Fernanda said, without looking up from her plate. It was the first thing she had said in 20 minutes. She said it the way you say something you have been holding back and have decided you are done holding. The room went very still. I'm sorry, I said. Say that again. Fernanda set down her wine glass. Your neighborhood is appreciating. We thought if you were going to be here full-time anyway, it made more sense to sell rather than let it sit empty. The equity could go toward the kids' college funds. She finally looked at me. We were going to bring it up tonight. I understood then that the dinner had not been spontaneous. That the check-in on the phone had not been a check-in. That Mateo and Fernanda had sat across a table from each other, perhaps at this same table, and planned the sequence of this conversation, the proposal first, then, once I had agreed to move in the house. In the version they had rehearsed, I had already said yes by the time Fernanda mentioned the listing. I had not said yes. I reached down and picked up my handbag from the floor beside my chair. I set it on my lap. Diego was looking at the table. Paulina had gone very still in the way that people go still when they realize they have been brought to witness something they did not consent to witness. Rosa, Diego said quietly. It's fine, I told him. I unzipped the outer pocket of the bag, a brown leather bag I had owned for 11 years, bought on sale at a department store the Christmas after Pilar's youngest was born, and I took out the folded envelope. I set it on the table in front of my plate. Mateo looked at it. What is that? Open it, I said. He did not move. Fernanda looked at the envelope, then at me. Mateo, I said. Open it. He picked it up. He unfolded it. Inside were 3 pages clipped together, a document his eyes moved across in silence for a long moment. This is, he stopped. A summary, I said. My financial advisor helped me prepare it. It documents every expense I have covered, in full or in part, related to your household and your children over the past 4 years. Childcare hours, calculated at the market rate for Phoenix, that's $19.50 an hour for the current rate, applied to documented hours only, conservatively estimated. Transportation costs. Out-of-pocket expenses I absorbed directly. Work hours I lost while providing care that were not reimbursed. Mateo was still reading. The total is $148,400, I said. Rounded down. Fernanda made a sound that was not quite a word. That does not include the $340 I spent on Christmas presents the year you went to Cabo, I said. You sent $200. I kept it and applied it. The net there is $140. It's noted in the appendix. Mom. Mateo's voice had changed. This isn't, you can't just... I can't just what? I asked. Document my own labor? He set the pages down on the table. He looked at me with an expression I did not recognize at first, and then I did recognize it. It was the expression of someone who has walked into a room they believed was empty and found that someone has been living there the whole time. You've been keeping track, he said. It came out like an accusation. No, I said. I kept nothing at the time. I put this together in October, over 3 weeks, from memory and bank records. My advisor was very helpful. She said the methodology was conservative. I paused. She also said I was not the first client she had helped prepare something like this. What do you want? Fernanda said. Her voice had lost the smooth warmth it sometimes carried. What is the point of this? The point, I said, is that you asked me tonight to surrender my home and become a permanent, unpaid domestic employee of your household. And I want you to understand clearly what that arrangement has already cost me, before you ask me to make it permanent. Mateo pushed back from the table slightly. We're not asking you to do it for free. You'd have room and board. I have room and board, I said. I own them. In my name. On a corner lot with a lemon tree. Diego exhaled slowly. I'm not going to sell my house, I said. I am not going to move into your guest room. And I am not going to continue providing full-time childcare for 2 children while you travel 30 to 40 days a year, without acknowledgement, without compensation, and without being asked. I folded my hands on the table. If you would like me to be involved in Sebastian's and Camille's lives, which I would very much like to be, we can discuss what that looks like. Reasonably. Like adults. Mateo was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was lower and tighter than it had been all evening. You're really going to sit there and put a dollar amount on being their grandmother? I looked at him steadily. You put a dollar amount on it first, I said. You just assumed the number was 0. Nobody finished dinner. Diego and Paulina left 30 minutes after I set the envelope on the table. Diego hugged me at the door, quietly, and said nothing useful, which was at least honest. Paulina said she hoped everything worked out, which was the kind of thing you say when you don't know what else to say and are relieved to be leaving. Fernanda took both children upstairs at 8 o'clock. She did not say goodnight to me. Mateo and I sat at the table after everyone else had gone. The food was still on the stove. The kitchen smelled like the meal I had cooked, which now felt like evidence of something I should not have done. You ambushed me, he said. He was not angry in the way I expected, not loud, not explosive. He was cold, which was harder. You planned a dinner to tell me to sell my house, I said. I'm not sure ambush is the right word for either of us. He was quiet. Then, where did this even come from? You've never said anything. I looked at him for a moment. Then I began. You told me, when Sebastian was 8 months old, that you needed me Thursday through Sunday because Fernanda's mother had a visitor. You did not ask. You told me. And I said yes because he was 8 months old, and I rearranged a trip I'd been planning for 2 months, and I never mentioned it. I paused. What I was actually doing that weekend was caring for your infant son alone for 4 days while you were in Dallas. Not visiting. Working. Mateo said nothing. You told me the Christmas you went to Cabo that you'd send money for the children's presents. You sent $200 in January. Christmas was December 25th. I spent $340 before that morning because I was not going to let your children have a smaller Christmas because the transfer was late. I kept my voice level. What I was actually doing while you were in Cabo was keeping your children at my house for 5 nights over Christmas, covering the difference myself, and not telling you the number until right now. His jaw had tightened. You told me the night Camille had a fever that Fernanda preferred to be informed of these things. Fernanda was at a dinner. I had been alone in your house for 4 hours with a sick infant, brought her fever down, had her settled and comfortable, and the feedback I received was that I had communicated incorrectly. I paused. What I was actually doing that night was the job of 2 parents. By myself. On a Friday. And tonight you told me that my role, your word Mateo role, is to watch your children while you and Fernanda travel and build your careers, and that if I have a problem with that, the door is right there. I looked at him directly. What I was actually doing for the past 4 years while you were building your career was making it possible. Every flight you took, every contract you closed, every trip to Cabo and Seattle and Singapore that is apparently still coming, I made those possible. I was the infrastructure you forgot to account for. Mateo looked at the table for a long time. I didn't think of it that way, he said finally. I know, I said. That's what the document is for. I stood up. I picked up my handbag. I left the envelope on the table. I love your children, I said. I will always love your children. But love is not the same as labor, and I am not available to provide both indefinitely without being seen. I pushed my chair in. Call me when you're ready to have a different conversation. I walked to the door. I did not slam it. I pulled it closed behind me with the same quiet click it always made, and I stood on the front step for a moment in the November air and I breathed. Mateo called 4 days later. His voice was different, not soft exactly, but stripped of the particular smoothness he had carried into that dinner. He asked if we could talk. I said yes. We talked for an hour and 40 minutes, and it was the most honest conversation we had had in years, possibly ever, and it was hard in the way that honest conversations between people who love each other and have hurt each other tend to be hard. He did not ask me to sell my house again. It is February now. 3 months since that dinner. Sebastian and Camille came to my house last Saturday, just for the afternoon. Mateo dropped them off, stayed for coffee, sat at my kitchen table and talked to me the way he used to talk to me before Fernanda's system in Singapore, and the guest room became the architecture of our relationship. Camille fell asleep on the couch under the old blanket I've had since before Mateo was born. Sebastian helped me trim the lemon tree, or tried to, wielding a pair of garden shears that were twice the size of his hands with the serious concentration of someone who believes he is very useful. He is. He just doesn't know yet what usefulness should cost. I think about what I should have said sooner, and I have made a certain peace with the fact that I didn't. I was raised to believe that love expressed itself through doing, through showing up, through feeding people, through absorbing the friction of other people's lives without complaint. That is not a wrong way to love someone. But it becomes wrong when the people you are loving have stopped noticing the cost, and you have stopped telling them. Silence is not the same as acceptance. I confused them for a long time. What I know now at 63 that I did not know at 32 when Gerardo left and I started building everything from scratch. The work you do in quiet is still work. The hours you give are still hours. The money you spend from your own account on someone else's children, on someone else's Christmas morning, on someone else's deferred invoice, that is still money, and it still came from somewhere, and the somewhere is you. None of it disappears just because you didn't present a bill at the time. There is a version of this story where I say the dinner was the worst night of my life. It wasn't. The worst nights were the ones before it, when I drove home in the dark and told myself it would even out, and almost believed it. The dinner was just the night I finally stopped. I kept the lemon tree. I kept the corner lot. I kept the house that is in my name and has been for 19 years, and I intend to keep it for 19 more. If any part of this story felt familiar, if you recognize the quiet arithmetic of someone whose contribution has gone unaccounted for, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes the person who needs to hear it is you. The story you just heard is a work of fiction created for entertainment purposes. Names, characters, and events are entirely fictional and do not represent any real person or situation.